All right, drivers across the country are filling up ahead of the long weekend, but they're in for some sticker shock when they do. You're in for some serious pain at the pumps if you're filling up in Vancouver. The price of gas is already hovering around a record high. Pipeline politics, of course, could make that situation much worse, though, because Alberta Premier Rachel Notley has now been given a green light to cut off oil to BC. That threat is, of course, over the BC government's resistance to Kinder Morgan's Trans Mountain pipeline expansion. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau reiterated Ottawa's support for that project in New York today.
We determined that this project is in the national interest, and that is why we are focused on getting this pipeline that provides access to new markets for our oil resources built. What we have proposed in our Finance Minister's proposal yesterday is to remove some of the risk by providing a sort of insurance policy.
Well, let's go straight to the source of that proposal. Finance Minister Bill Morneau joins us on set here. Nice to see you. Welcome back to the show.
Happy to be here, Peter.
So you talked yesterday, and the Prime Minister talked there about a proposal. You talked about being prepared or willing to offer indemnity. Is this just at a proposal stage? Like, have you actually sat down and talked with Kinder Morgan about this idea of indemnification?
Well, you're right to ask the question that way because there's really two things that we're talking about here. So, yes, we're in discussions with Kinder Morgan. The Prime Minister instructed me to meet with them to talk about how we can make sure this pipeline, this twinning of the Trans Mountain expansion project gets done. But what I was trying to do yesterday was talk to Canadians and to say that we know this project is in the economic advantage of Canadians, creates thousands of jobs, and I wanted to lay out some principles. Kinder Morgan has said that they can't deal with dealing with problems between governments. That's a reasonable position. So we're just saying, in principle, not related to those discussions, in principle, we want to find a way to make sure that we use our federal government powers to get this done. One idea is that we'd be willing to offer an indemnification against that particular uncertainty. So that was the frame. We also said that we think it's a commercially viable project. So that kind of approach to indemnifying against political uncertainty is something that, if not Kinder Morgan, we just think generally that's something that we would be willing to do because we know we need to get this project done.
I get that. And I think there's a lot of things that people are wanting to hear and see from you. This sort of made people scratch their heads a little bit and say, okay, well, what is this proposal? Can you give me an example of what would trigger an indemnification? What kind of a delay do you envision would actually trigger some kind of a payment or retribution from the Canadian government to Kinder Morgan?
First of all, again, I'm going to separate those two things. So this is just generally us talking about the fact that we know there's risks in this project that are politically motivated. So we're just saying that if something's politically motivated, we can deal with that risk. So that's what we're talking about, the willingness to identify something that creates a delay or uncertainty because of a political motivation to try and stall the project. We've said, you know, it's federally regulated, regular jurisdiction. It's been approved by the federal government, by the provincial government. We've gone through the rigorous process to get the right environmental assessment and put in place an oceans protection plan. The project needs to go forward. The government's ability to ensure that through that sort of approach is one approach. Now, right. I want to just say that we're going to be continuing on this project to make sure it gets done. So it's not the only way we might do that, but that's a principled approach to dealing with the problem that we have in front of us. We really want to make sure that Canadians understand that when a project is in their best interests, we have rule of law in this country, we're going to find a way to get it done.
Campbell Clark asked you a question at the news conference yesterday from the Globe and Mail that I thought was zeroed in on a lot of this. Are you saying that if Kinder Morgan doesn't build this, that the Canadian government is committed to finding a way to build it with or without them?
Again, we're having discussions that are separate.
I get that.
We've said that we think this project is absolutely commercially viable. We've said that it provides big economic advantage. It allows our resources to get a world price by going to international markets, creates 15,000 jobs. So it's positive for the economy. That's why we say it's economically viable with or without any particular company, because it's something that's in Canada's best interest and good for Canadians.
And yet, Kinder Morgan's board has said you have 14 days to prove to them that it can actually get built. Not that it's a good idea and not that it will have great returns, but that this thing can get built. We're running out of time. Does this indemnification actually address that? What they would like to see is you saying, we're going to build it, we're going to put shovels in the ground starting on June 1st, and if there's a problem, the federal government will address that as we move forward.
what I was identifying yesterday was some principles that we might be able to use to actually deal with the particular uncertainty that we have right now. Let me tell you where we share the sense of anxiety or urgency. We agree this project needs to go forward. It also needs to go forward soon, because any delay actually causes the challenges that we have in getting the right price for our resources to be delayed even further. It causes the challenge of actually getting those jobs going to be delayed. So it's actually, that delay, it has real impacts on Canadians. And
100%. That's
why we want to move forward. And that's why we're willing to be creative, to get at the issues that have been presented to us. And that's a construct, an approach that we think can make sense in the context of what we're dealing with.
But you and your government and your Prime Minister have repeatedly said you have the national authority, you have the national capacity to make this thing get built. What does that mechanically look like? How does that actually play itself out? Because it's not on edicts about indemnification, it's not on potential buyouts. That's about actually somehow getting shovels in the ground despite opposition to it. How do you assert that national authority?
Well, we have that federal jurisdiction. Now,
we're not disputing that. I'm asking how you exercise it.
Well, we have that. Obviously, we have a private sector proponent that currently owns the Trans Mountain expansion, as well as the original Trans Mountain pipeline. So we need to have discussions with them to determine how we can get there. So we're in those discussions. That's ongoing. I really can't talk about that because, of course, that's something that's between them and us. But what I can do is outline for Canadians so they can understand the importance of the project, the positive impact it can have, and some ideas that we have that show that we're taking an approach that's commercially viable, because we're talking about an approach that's commercial by its very nature as one idea, and something that can enable not only one proponent, but could enable any proponent to be successful in doing this. So again, we're not talking about any specific proposal. We're really just talking about the Canadian government's approach to being creative, getting this done, because we know it's in all of our best interests.
Are you prepared to take an equity stake in the project itself? Invest your own money and make Canadian taxpayers sort of shareholders in this project?
What I can say is that I'm not going to get into the solution set at this stage. Those discussions are happening, and what I know is Canadians want to know that we've got our sleeves rolled up at the table, and we do.
I want to turn to NAFTA before I let you go. The deadline of today has now come and gone. Paul Ryan from the House of Representatives has said, well, maybe there's some wiggle room of a couple of weeks. Is this time the deadline real, and how does this play itself out for us?
We think that there's a need for us to get to a conclusion on NAFTA if it's possible, given the fact that we all have our interests that we want to satisfy. So we recognize there's a level of uncertainty that we have when we're in these discussions. So it would be advantageous if we can get to an agreement that works for all three parties. We, as the Prime Minister, I think just on the clip that you showed, we are cautiously optimistic. We are at the table working on the issues that are presented to us from both Mexico and the United States. We feel like we're making progress. More progress still needs to be made. So a deal, as you know, isn't done until it's done. And there's things in there that we need to ensure are protecting us in any arrangement. We need to know that the deal works for the long term. We need to know that there's a way to resolve difficulties in the future. So there's structural things that are important, and then there's the terms. So of course we need to make sure that we deal with the auto sector appropriately. So there's work to be done. People have been really putting in the time and the efforts, and we've been in constant communication to get it done.
Donald Trump has said, hey, all this uncertainty is good for us. Nobody's building an auto plant in Mexico while these are ongoing. What is the cost to Canada of all of this uncertainty, and now the potential that uncertainty is going to go out for an event horizon yet further away?
I always want to bring you back to where we are economically. We have the lowest unemployment rate we've had in 40 years. We've got a situation where our growth last year was the top among G7 countries at 3%. So it is important to always bring it back to that. While I always want business investment to be higher, that's a positive indicator. We did have 8% growth in business investment last year. So it's important to think about where we are. There is a level of uncertainty generated by any negotiation. So we want to get through that. But we do have a strong economy. We're going to try and deal with this. We're listening to Canadians about how we structure that, listening to businesses. We're trying to deal with other risks and concerns. You know, obviously I'm out talking about competitiveness and making sure that we address appropriately, you know, tax changes in the United States and consider the impact in Canada and the United States. And as you've talked to me about today, we're trying to make sure that we can get our resources to market. So it's not any one thing that we need to be dealing with. There's multiple things. But we're starting from a good position. When more Canadians are working, Canada works. That's a positive situation, and we're going to start from that.
Bill Morneau, we got to leave there, but thanks for making time.
Thanks,
nice
Peter.
to see you. Federal Finance Minister Bill Morneau.